Hello, welcome to the Strategic Intelligence Podcast. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Thomas Pothalingam, and today we're discussing COP29, the 29th United Nations Climate Change Conference. What is it? Where is it happening? And most importantly, why does it matter? So COP29 took place in Azerbaijan from November 11th to the 22nd of 2024, bringing together global climate leaders, climate activists, and businesses to progress on solutions to the climate crisis. COP29 was expected to focus on climate finance, specifically on how climate finance is being mobilized, the various funds through which investment is made available, and who will be the greatest recipients, as well as mining's role in ensuring the energy transition or paving the way for future climate pledges. Today, I'm joined by three guests to discuss key aspects of COP29 in more detail.
Today, we're joined by Clarice, who's an expert in hydrogen from the energy transition team at Global Data. Hydrogen is a key energy transition technology which will play an important role in reducing global carbon emissions and decarbonize hard-to-abate industries. Was it a topic of discussion in COP29? And if so, what were the most salient points discussed with regards to hydrogen?
Hi, Thomas, and thank you for your question. So yes, hydrogen was on the COP29 presidency agenda, and the important role of the technology was discussed under the new Hydrogen Declaration, which effectively presented a plan to boost green hydrogen production and utilisation, also setting the stage for international collaboration ahead of COP30. The declaration called for endorsement from diverse stakeholders to effectively scale up hydrogen by acting on a range of key strategies such as demand creation, standards and certification, finance, but also research and development. There are multiple reasons as to why this is to be considered a step forward. So this declaration was built on the previous COP28's Declaration of Intent, which similarly outlined a commitment to accelerate low carbon hydrogen production, as well as transition away from fossil fuel production. So what COP29 has done in terms of hydrogen, it has set a broad roadmap for action. This includes public procurement programs as well as fostering public-private partnerships. And it also acknowledged that hydrogen is a vital tool for driving progress. On the other hand, however, although this new declaration was backed by several UN bodies, the declaration was not part of official COP29 negotiations, and whilst it did encourage countries to include hydrogen in their national climate and energy plans, that's all it was, merely an encouragement. So this goes to show that change will have to come from the private sector as well. An example of this is the fact that 50 high-profile companies within the shipping industry, which is a notoriously hard-to-abate sector, have all signed a green hydrogen call to action earlier this week at COP29, effectively calling for a prioritization of investment in hydrogen-derived fuels as opposed to transition fuels such as LNG. So with this strategy, the industry is aiming to achieve full decarbonisation of the maritime sector, but this will require public-private collaboration to secure the necessary funding. And this was evidenced by the fact that amongst the major sector players that signed this call for action, Fortescue stood out because, interestingly, in the last few months, the company has actually been scaling back on its green hydrogen production. So we see a willingness to invest in the sector and recognizing the importance of hydrogen. However, the lack of funding denotes a need for public and private sector collaboration. So overall, the recognition of hydrogen's crucial role at COP29 is a positive factor. However, there was an absence of specific targets and clearly defined plans. This, combined with the lack of participation of key hydrogen-producing regions like the US, which was exemplified by President Joe Biden's absence, does raise concerns about whether these declarations will lead to tangible progress or whether they will just remain theoretical commitments.
I'm also joined by Chris Papadopoullos from Strategic Intelligence, who's going to talk about climate finance. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Tom. How you doing?
All right, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good.
So a significant portion of COP29 discussions are predicated on addressing previous COP agendas. COP27 and 28 focused on mobilizing climate finance, especially in regard to making climate mitigation and adaptation more available, accessible, and affordable for small island developing states. and the least developed countries, looking forward toward achieving the most holistic climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. Climate finance is again a top priority of COP29. So this has been billed as a finance COP. What have been the implications for corporates?
There haven't been that many, unless you sort of work in finance or work specifically on climate finance. If I don't know if you remember last year, but there was a huge amount of corporate buzz on COP28 it was in Dubai, and we even had people there covering it, and lots more of our clients were asking us about it than this year, sorry. And I think the reason for that was because they were discussing this thing called the global stock take, which was about taking stock of progress since the Paris Agreement, on things like emissions and phasing out fossil fuels. There was a big debate about whether countries were going to commit to fully phase out fossil fuels and the language around that. There were some other big commitments around investing in certain, climate technologies like carbon capture, and also a commitment to start action on non-carbon greenhouse gases. So things like methane, and lots of other gases that are used in they don't have sort of nice names, used in the production of things like chips and by which I mean computer chips, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, lots of things like that. So a lot of sectors were interested last year. It was quite conceivable that if you were the sort of head of sustainability or head of ESG at a company, you had to keep an eye on last year's COP, because it might in some way impact your long-term strategic thinking on sustainability. So there was a lot more noise. This year it's very different. The stakes are still important, but not to most corporates from a kind of insulated perspective. So if you're I don't know, if you're like a UK supermarket or a US manufacturer of drugs or something, you might have paid attention last year. This year, you don't really have to track what's going on. The main things, the main things that might come out of this, one is an agreement on how international carbon markets should work, the international carbon offsets market should work. So if you're a company, if you're a country with lots of rainforest, and a company wants to set up a rainforest preservation project, sell some carbon offsets to a company in the US, should that count as US carbon emission reductions, or should it count as that country's carbon emissions reductions? How should the companies count it? This is just one of the issues that they're trying to sort out. They may get a fudge. So the carbon offsets, they lost a lot of confidence. The companies lost a lot of confidence in carbon offsets in 2023. This was something we covered, because there was a couple of big scandals, a couple of big name resignations in that year. I think companies like EasyJet, Fortescue, a big mining company, stepped away from the offsets market, said we're not going to buy offsets anymore. Lots of companies did that. But there may be a fudge because there's lots of financial interest in carbon offsets. There's a lot of companies that could generate a lot of revenue. A lot of companies who are sort of invested in it. But if the standards are set too high, then that revenue gets harder to attain. So
It's
so
about
they may get a sort of fudge deal on that. So go ahead.
about like treading a fine line between those two aspects of like making it accessible, but also making it like effective and meaningful.
I think so, yeah. I think the more you sort of raise the standards, the narrower the market's going to be. So it depends. It's difficult because some of these projects it's the value of them is very much estimated, but the financial value of them has to be very exact. So it's a very difficult problem that they have to sort of work out in these negotiations. The other thing is the main thing they're trying to negotiate is the amount of money that they're going to agree to loan or give to developing economies for climate mitigation and adaptation, which it's got a formal name. I can't quite remember what it is with its own acronym. But again, if you work at somewhere like the World Bank or the IMF, it's really important. Or if you work in providing flood defenses for developing countries, it's very important. But if you're a big company, in US, UK, Europe, China, even, probably it's not that important to you. So um,
I think
the buzz
that
around COP has been a bit less this year. I mean, there may be some stuff on the energy side that's more important, but on the finance side, some of it's going to be important to banks and things, financial institutions, but the non-finance and non-energy corporates a bit less so.
I think that particular initiative was the new collective qualified goal.
That's it. Yeah, they want to aim for $1 trillion dollars a year by 2030, every year by 2030. But it's a bit like, they missed they had a much smaller target and they kept missing it. But to me, it's a bit like if somebody said to you, I've set a target by 2030, I want to be 8 foot tall. All the important bits are not the target's not the important bit. The important bit is well, how are you going to do that? What
Mhm.
form is it going to take? Is it grants? Is it loans? What's going to depend as climate finance? Is this like lending to renewables? Is it just like energy efficient companies? No one's ever really defined this exactly. So there's more important. The things that they do to achieve the target are more important than the target. So again, it's this sort of it's one of the buzz around this one from the corporate world has just been a lot less.
We're also joined by Rob from the tech team at Global Data. Hi, Rob, how are you?
I'm pretty well, thank you. And you?
All right, thank you. Not too bad. So tech plays an important role at COP, helping to coordinate the pathways for governments and various industries to reduce their emissions, especially for those sectors where it is more difficult to achieve emissions reductions, like steel and cement. These sectors are some of the highest emitters, making targeting them essential to climate action. Given the importance of digitalization in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening climate resilience, and advancing sustainable development, the tech sector is vital to accelerate climate positive action. A major concern should be global climate action initiatives like COP losing momentum and becoming irrelevant and unimpactful. So, is there anything to report, or has COP29 broadly gone unnoticed, Rob?
Very good observations. It's certainly less noticed this time round, and each of the last few years from Glasgow, COP26. It doesn't help that it's going to petro countries, sort of doesn't present a good image. And when the authoritarian leader of the country says that oil and gas are a gift from God, it sort of goes against the grain a little bit. But there has been some talking. We had the first ever sort of digital day at COP29. And they were talking about things like emissions targets, green standards, the circular economy, green computing. So yes, they're certainly addressing the issues, and there's a lot of chat about it. But to be honest, I'm not aware of anything coming out as a result of these discussions. But at least they're being acknowledged in a broad forum. But then you're missing some of the key players went there obviously at a geopolitical level. This is part of the problem. We're talking about a global issue in a time of deglobalization.
Absolutely. And do you think that COP has become a glorified marketing exercise for these countries? And what is the path for it to become relevant again?
Good question. I mean, the thing is, I don't think this is so much a glorified marketing exercise from the perspective of the technology companies. I'm not sure how many were actually there even. Certainly in my day-to-day monitoring of what's going on in the market, very little has been said, announced or done. I think it's a broader issue, and a lot of the tech companies, the tech sector is making good progress. It's certainly the leading sector in my mind about how to address various aspects of ESG as a whole, let alone just sustainability. But then you've got slight issues like the sudden impact of generative AI using 10 times as much energy for each search as a normal old-fashioned search, shall we say. And then all the use of electricity and of water and straining the aged infrastructure that's being based on. So it's a bit of a dilemma because, tech is leading, but equally tech poses a lot of the problems. We're seeing some innovations, a lot of people going towards small nuclear reactors and things like that, starting old nuclear reactors, trying to find ways to innovate. There's a lot of work still to be done.
And has anything been agreed upon at this COP specifically targeting the tech sector or making them more effective at enabling climate mitigation and adaptation?
There's been a lot of discussion on sort of the targets of the emissions, and people like the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, and other bodies were there. And so, it's typical telecoms. It's still very sort of political with a small p. A lot of standards bodies. There's so many standards bodies that which ones to choose from. But it's getting there. It's well intentioned. I think there's no harm in everyone getting together. But personally, it'd be nice if after the digital day, they'd come up with something like the manifesto we wrote, committing to certain targets and saying, yeah, we all get this. Not just we get this, but this is what we will do. And at the moment, it's really very much down to individual countries, individual regulators, individual companies.
Absolutely. It's all about targeting these pathways to actual emissions reductions or changing behavior.
Yeah, it's great setting targets, but there's no point setting a target if you don't monitor it, measure it, and report it.
Exactly. Thank you, Rob. That was really informative.
Thank you very much for all these insights from our guests. Thanks for listening, and from us in Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.